describe.
Popcorn therapy. Holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. Hey everybody, welcome back to Popcorn Therapy with me, Julie Peters. I am a therapist and a tarot reader. I'm a writer, and what we're going to be talking about today is elemental. And we're going to talk about love because it's Valentine's Day season, and I think there's so many fascinating things to talk about around love, around this movie. So I'm gonna call this season 2 because I don't know. It's a new year, and why not call it season 2? I have been having so much fun doing this podcast and just exploring these themes and being able to share some of this stuff with some of my wonderful guests and sometimes on my own too. So why not give it a season 2? It's totally arbitrary, but we'll call it that anyway. So welcome to season 2 of Popcorn Therapy with Julie Peters. All right. So Pixar's Elemental is a relatively new movie. I think it was 2023 that it came out. And I have seen this movie like countless times. I've seen it so many times because my child, who's now 4, has been obsessed with this movie for at least a year or so. And it's often the requested fire movie that we end up watching when he wants to see something. He's moved on lately to Totoro, which I also love. I think he has great taste in movies, but Elemental was the choice for a while. So I'm going to summarize this movie a little bit, and we are going to talk about spoilers. Even if you haven't seen it and you find this discussion interesting, I think you can watch it and enjoy a lot of it. Even though there's spoilers, it's not a twisty-turny necessarily type of movie, but we are going to talk about what happens around the romance between the two main characters, Wade and Ember. So just to give you a little context, Peter Sohn is the director of this movie, and he based it loosely on his own experiences growing up in New York with his parents who immigrated from Korea. So New York is Element City in this film, and it's sort of intended to be this kind of very multicultural place where lots of different people can come from different places. And in the context of the movie, it's the 4 elements. So there are air people, water people, fire people, and earth people. And the animation is fantastic. And I love the little details of the different element people and all the puns that come through, Lava Java in Firetown and stuff like that. Coal nuts. Another one was they would sell t-shirts at the fireplace that said, "Kiss me, I'm Firish." So there's just lots of cute little details about that. In Element City, the water people came first. So they're coded as white, and it's very clear that water people have the highest privilege, they have the highest history, or the longest history in this place, and they kind of run the town. I forget who came next. I think it was Earth next, and then Air followed, and then Fire people were the last to come. So Ember Lumen's parents are coming in this sort of wave of immigration where they're sort of new to Element City. They're coded as Asian, but Fireland is obviously an imaginary place. And they have those sort of classic little immigrant moments where they're coming in and the immigration officer can't pronounce their names, so he just tells them, your names are now going to be Bernie and Cinder. And they're like, okay, I guess those are our names now. And we see lots of little microaggressions that the fire people experience. Ember's mom, who's Cinder in this story, is pregnant when they arrive, and throughout the course of Ember's life, she sees Firetown growing, lots more fire people coming, lots more sort of fire culture infiltrating into the city. But when Bernie and Cinder first arrived, there wasn't a lot of that. There weren't that many fire people around, and there's a sequence where Bernie and Cinder are looking for a place to live, and they get the doors slammed in their faces over and over again because there's racism against fire people in Element City. So that's the context that we're looking at here. Bernie and Cinder create a little cultural store called The Fireplace, and they raise Ember to follow in their footsteps and take over the store when Bernie retires. And in the context of this movie, there's this idea that elements don't mix. So, you're supposed to date within your own kind of thing. Ember meets Wade, though, who is a water person, and they end up falling in love over the course of the movie, and that's what a lot of the movie is about. So, one thing that I find really interesting about this movie is that I believe it's the first Pixar movie that is about a romance. Pixar kind of revolutionized movies in, I think it was 1995 or 1992 with Toy Story, where they started to create these really emotionally resonant stories that could be about connection and love, but not necessarily romance. I was a 90s child growing up on Little Mermaid, Sleeping Beauty, Aladdin, like all of those Disney movies that really centered romance in a very strong way. And so it's very interesting to me to see Pixar returning to the romance narrative, but trying to do it in a little bit of a different way than what was done around the time when I was growing up, when, Toy Story was created to say, like, we don't always have to be about romance. Like, what if there are other stories that we could care about too that are about other kinds of connection and community and things like that, and not just romance? So Elemental returns to that old story. Narratives of romance, I think, are incredibly important for us in terms of our the lives that we live, right? In my therapy practice, romance, love, partnership, marriage, obviously, these are huge topics that come up all the time with people that I'm working with. And, I think some people trivialize these problems. Oh, it's just about some boy or some girl or whatever it is. But ultimately, human beings are really wired for connection, not necessarily just romantic connection, but we really do have a drive to connect and to belong. And romantic partnership, which in our culture, the standard way to do that is monogamous pairings, is essentially this idea of belonging to someone, committing to someone, creating a new family that you can hold on to for the rest of your life. That's the ideal. Obviously, that's not how it always works, but that's the narrative that we're given in this culture, right? And so I think the drive to love is a very normal, very natural, very human, and of course, not everybody is interested in romance, and that's totally fair and that's healthy too, just in a sort of different area of things. But if you're somebody that cares about love and romance, I think it's worth working on within yourself. Something that I really learned in my experiences of, having lots of boyfriends that were all kind of similar and, a lot of the time it ended the same way. And then finally, being with my husband now, who's quite different from the sort of stereotype, my type of what I was doing before. I think initially I was coming with this narrative of like, oh, you just meet someone or you find the one or you'll just know in this sort of mysterious kind of way. And I got a lot of value out of reading Bell Hooks's book, All About Love, which is the first book about love that I've read that really thinks about love critically. Like, what does it mean to love? How can we behave around love? What if love is a verb and not a noun? It's an action that we take every day to show up to our love relationships. I think looking into our love relationships in therapy, it touches on so many things that are so foundational to who we are as people, including attachment styles, which I'm going to talk about today with Elemental, because I think it's actually a great example of how attachment style can work within romance. So I'm really sort of a proponent of thinking about love critically and working on yourself in terms of how you love, where you come from, what are your family narratives around love, what does love mean to you, what are your patterns, all of those things, because I think if having a healthy love relationship is important to you, most of us have to do that work. Okay. So let's talk about attachment. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth in the 60s, is essentially this idea that we either have secure attachment or insecure attachment. And there are three types of insecure attachment that a lot of us relate to. So you may have heard some of this before. It's pretty common, sort of pop culture wise. But essentially, the idea is that our blueprint for love was created when we were very small children, even to a degree in utero, some of the stuff, can start happening already. So if we have a secure attachment with our caregiver or caregivers, our primary attachment figures, which is usually mom and or dad, more frequently mom for reasons I won't get into too much right now. There's some biology, chemistry, cultural reasons, all of that kind of stuff. Um, and I think it's so interesting to note. I don't know how they came up with this statistic. I don't know how you study this, but apparently the bar for secure attachment is having a parent who is consistently present 30% of the time, 30. Okay. So you just need a parent who's consistent and present 30% of the time, and that's enough to give you secure attachment, which is the attachment style that's like easiest to live with. Okay. We'll put it that way. Unfortunately, for many of us, that bar was not met in many different kinds of ways. And so we end up having some variation of insecure attachment. And I have my own little theory about this that I'll share in a second. So the three types of insecure attachment are anxious, which is basically this sort of desperate need to love and to be reassured that love is not about to leave. It's sort of an expectation that love is always about to leave. And there's a fight for that kind of energy with anxious attachment. Avoidant attachment, the hallmark of that is I've never had my needs met. Why would I expect my needs to be met? So I'm going to avoid love and closeness. Love and closeness feels threatening to me. It feels vulnerable to me. So I'm going to distance myself from it. Okay. The third type is disorganized attachment. So the first two, anxious and avoidant, they are essentially strategies that arise under stress and they work. Okay, so if you have anxious or avoidant attachment, that's because it helped to either calm your anxiety or settle something within a relationship or stay connected within the family, something like that. So these are strategies that are effective, and that's why we have them. Okay. Disorganized attachment is essentially if you grew up in a situation where no strategy was going to work for you. You couldn't ask for reassurance and get it. You couldn't avoid and be given that space and that safety. So, usually disorganized attachment comes up in situations of relatively extreme stress, anxiety, trauma, abuse, complex PTSD often comes with disorganized attachment. And it's just essentially that sense of like there isn't a blueprint where I know that I can calm my attachment anxiety through these styles. Okay. So there's lots of information out there about attachment theory, lots of different ways that people talk about it. What I've noticed is that people tend to think of it almost like a personality test, like, what's your sign kind of thing. And like, oh, I'm an anxious attachment person or I'm a, avoidant attachment person or secure or whatever it is. But I find the reality of it is much more nuanced than that. I'm someone, for example, that has secure attachment in a lot of my relationships, but there are certain relationships where my avoidant or anxious tendencies will tend to get triggered. So again, these styles tend to come up under stress, and I think they can shift and change and be fluid depending on your situation, your life, developmentally, like where you are in your life, your attachment figures. You might have a different style between your mom and your dad, for example. And there's also something that I've really noticed about anxious and avoidant attachment that I think is really interesting. So, what I've noticed with myself to a degree, and also with many of the people that I work with, anxious and avoidant attachment are like, those rotating doors, sliding doors, whatever it is that they're called. They spin around each other. So often when you're in a love relationship, something will happen to trigger stress or anxiety. Maybe this is someone's not texting you back for a couple of days. Often the anxious impulse will come first. What's going on? Where are you? Can you get in touch with me? There's a sort of a trying, a fighting for reassurance that comes. When the reassurance doesn't come or doesn't come quickly enough or isn't satisfying or whatever it is, the avoidant attachment then takes over. And that avoidant attachment says something like, well, I'm going to reject you before you can reject me. I'm going to completely cut this off and avoid this relationship because this is too stressful for me. And then, we say we're going to break up or whatever it is. And then something draws us back in. The anxious attachment returns and we go back into that spinning wheel of attachment. you can get off that roller coaster. There are some ways to do it, but I've noticed that that actually feels to me, it might just be my sample size, who I'm working with, my own experiences. Maybe not everybody is like this, but I feel like it's much more common for anxiety, that anxious attachment and avoidant attachment to kind of be almost two sides of the same coin rather than I am this one or I am this other. A lot of the time we show elements of both. I also feel like it's just so incredibly common to have insecure attachment on some level. So I don't know about this 30% bar. I don't know again. I'm not sure where that came from. I think it's an interesting statistic because as a mom, there's this reassurance that like I don't have to be present and consistent every single second. Like I don't have to be an absolutely perfect mom. I just have to kind of do my best and I'll probably hit that 30% and my kid will be okay. So I like this statistic from that perspective, but also I'm not sure it plays out, in reality. Okay, so now that we've done a little bit of a primer on attachment theory, let's think about it in terms of elemental. Okay. So Wade Ripple, again, coated white. He's a water person. His family is very wealthy. That's very obvious when Ember visits his mom's apartment. Her brother is like a pretty successful artist. She has a pretty high position. I forget what she does, but she's got connections she can help Ember with. There's sort of this idea of like legacy. This family's been here for a long time. They have a lot of power and they have a lot of money. Okay. So Wade comes into the world with a lot of privilege. And his mom, at least as we see, is a very loving person, very emotional. Okay. So water people are like, I sort of love this movie too from I've studied lots of yoga, Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, things like that. The elements have correspondences, and this movie just absolutely nails it. And actually, tarot as well, of course, has the four elements in the four suits of the minor arcana, and the correspondences are really similar. So, the whole energy of water is emotion, it's the unconscious, it's flow, right? And Wade is, he cries as a personality trait, right? He loves beauty, and he'll really react emotionally with when he experiences beauty. There's a sweet moment when, he and Ember are watching a sports game, and he notices that one of the players is struggling because, he knows that he lost his mom recently or his mom's sick or something like that, and so he manages to create this wave, like a literal wave with all the water people, but it's, a wave in a sports stadium, that is encouraging this player to keep going. And Ember kind of looks at him with this amazement, like, how do you do that? Like, how do you just connect to people so easily? She really struggles with that. And I think that we really see the way that like water is about empathy, it's about connection, it's about emotion. In the tarot, the suit of cups is related to water, and it's all about the quest for love and connection. That's what that whole suit is really about. Now, Ember is a fire person, and fire is an element of it's related to like energy, movement, passion, going for something, and anger, right? Anger can be a part of that. And Ember definitely shows that, she can blow up. Like she can definitely have some anger come up from time to time. So it's very clear. I feel like Wade Ripple could be in a textbook of secure attachment to the point that I don't know if anyone's actually like this. But the key point for me is that there's a moment when the two of them have conflict, and we'll get a little more into this. But Wade says to Ember at a certain point, "I love you, Ember Lumen, and I think you love me too." So one of the hallmarks of secure attachment is knowing you're lovable, having the imprint that comes from a long time ago, from when you were a child, of really believing that you're lovable, that you're deserving of love, right? So having that parent that's consistently present and available and loving, you know, which in the context of attachment theory means present and available. Present means attuned, okay, which is what Wade does. It's empathy, it's paying attention, it's being able to meet people on their emotional level. So when a mother and child are first getting to know each other, a newborn and so on, a lot of what that whole process is mother and father as well, but it's a little bit of a different relationship. Usually mother, but father too, trying to figure out like why is this child crying? What does it need? Is it hungry, thirsty? tired? Does it need a change? Like whatever it is. And so it's that attuning, that learning, the different cries, like learning the routines of a child, learning to sort of care about what they need and give them what they need. That imprints in that child's nervous system long before they're verbal. Okay, long before they had any conscious idea of what's going on. They have that deeply held sense that they are fundamentally lovable. And so for Wade to be able to be vulnerable enough to say, I love you, without knowing what she's going to say back, indicates that he trusts that he's lovable. And he's able to be vulnerable enough to know that if she rejects him, he's not going to go into this spiral a lot of them go into around, he's not good enough. This is why he's not good enough. He's too this, not enough that, blah, blah, blah. Like all of those narratives that we have within ourselves around why we don't feel lovable. So he says, I love you. And the audacity to say, I think you love me too. Right. Only someone with very secure attachment could say something like that, make that assumption. It's natural for us to have a fear that the person is not gonna say it back, right? Of course. So in this case, actually, Ember doesn't say it back. I'm gonna get into Ember's story a little bit more there. It's not true, but she does say, "I don't love you, Wade, and, like, get out of my life. I don't wanna see you again." So again, secure attachment. I love that Wade listens to her and leaves. He doesn't, argue. He doesn't get angry or defensive. Um, some of you probably listened to, my Love is Blind episode, and you see a lot of this in Love is Blind when someone is romantically rejected. I'm thinking specifically about I think it was season 7, Leo gets romantically rejected, and he goes right into aggressive fight mode and starts insulting the person, starts talking about how she's not good enough for him. Like, that's a lot of, it could be anxious or avoidant attachment or many other things, but it's essentially his all of his internal narratives about how he is not good enough are coming up, and the way that his system is responding to that is through fight, which is not okay. That's not how we want to respond to romantic rejection. We have to respect the other person and what they're saying, even if we're not sure if it's true. If someone says, "I don't love you, I want you to leave me alone," we have to do what they're saying, right? That's an element of basic consent. So again, I love that I'm watching this movie over and over again with my 4-year-old boy who is having such a different imprint about romance through this movie than what I got through all of my 90s and later teen romances that tended to include leading men who were distant, potentially violent. There's a lot of like, I hate everyone in this room but you. If you think of sort of Bella Swan and Edward, the vampire in Twilight, he's a literal monster. Like he could kill her. There's a very violent undertone to that. And a lot of the time what tends to happen with these sort of distant men, um, I think it can go with any gender, but it's coded heterosexual because again of the cultural narrative. But I think it's sort of with any gender. If you are pursuing someone who has made clear they don't like you or has brushed you off before, but has maybe a little bit of that like, "Ooh, maybe there's some chemistry between us," or whatever it is, but no, no, thank you. There's this narrative that comes up around like, if I can get this person to love me, that will prove that I'm lovable. So that's partly why so many of us get into this cycle of chasing after people who are unavailable, is because ultimately our systems are actually trying to heal from that old attachment wound that told us that we were not lovable. In a way, it's kind of a healthy thing because it means some part of us believes we must be lovable enough to try, right? On the other hand, when we tend to pursue people who are unavailable, and this can look like a lot of different things. It can look like inconsistent communication, inconsistent texting, being told, I don't want to do this, and then you get back together. It can also tend to be being in a pattern of always being interested in people who are already in another relationship. Sometimes that's actually the avoidant impulse coming in because avoidant attachment actually desperately wants love and connection just like the rest of us, but there's a deep terror of the vulnerability that would come with that. So if you can fall in love with someone who's married already, let's say, there's always going to be a barrier there that's going to keep your heart a little bit safer, or at least it feels like that to your system. Of course, we can get deeply hurt in those situations as well. So we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot a little bit around that. But in order to love someone who is available, we have to make ourselves vulnerable in a way that might feel totally impossible. So let's talk about Ember. Okay. Ember has a little bit of avoidant attachment. Now, in this case, and again, this is a fantasy world. This isn't real life, obviously. But we get to know Ember's parents pretty well, and they're lovely. Like, they're great people. They care so much about Ember. They listen to her, they're present, they're attuned. They have their little squabbles or whatever it is. Mom, teases her sometimes about like, "Oh, I never smell love on you. You're never gonna fall in love," whatever it is. But ultimately, they are loving and present people. Like, they absolutely would be the kind of parents that you could have secure attachment from. So why does Ember have avoidant attachment? Now, this is a piece that I think is so interesting about elemental that we don't always see. Ember's avoidant attachment is based on intergenerational pressures and cultural racism that she experiences day to day. All of those microaggressions that we talked about when she has dinner with Wade's family, his uncle says, "I must say, you speak so well and clear." And she says, "Yeah, living in the same place your whole life will do that for you." It was sort of an uncomfortable laugh or whatever. She experiences that all the time. And it's not just about her individual life experiences, it's also where her parents came from. So we learn a little bit about the history of her grandparents, where Bernie and Cinder decided to leave Fireland after a big storm, I think it was, but they decided to move to Element City to create a better life for their unborn child, which becomes Ember. And we learn that there's a cutoff there, that Bernie's father, the the way they talk about it in the movie is so poignant. He gives them I forget what it's called, something like the great bow, like a deep respect for someone. And so Bernie bows to his father as they're leaving, and his father does not bow back because he doesn't like that he's leaving. He doesn't agree with that decision. And so Bernie gets cut off. And so that means Ember is also cut off from her grandparents, and there's this sort of distancing within the family. So cutoff is a whole other topic that we could get into, but what I'll say about it briefly is that when there's cutoff, the intergenerational stresses, traumas, histories, untold stories, secrets, family rules, coping mechanisms, patterns, and resilience, all of that stuff, it still gets passed down to the next generation, but there's a gap there, so there's no possibility for repair within that relationship and sort of shifting the intergenerational pattern that gets passed down. Okay? So Ember's grandparents avoidant, right? I don't like that my son is leaving. We don't know too much about, their motivations and so on, but we can assume it's something like maybe it's too vulnerable for me to keep caring about this person who's going to leave to the other side of the world. So I'm just going to cut him off and I'm never going to speak to him again. And that feels safer in my heart than telling him how much I miss him or trying to talk to him, you know, I don't even think there's any phones in this movie, but however it is that one would communicate long distance. Um, without being able to see that person often or whatever it is. So that's the avoidant impulse to keep oneself safe by kind of blocking, stopping, distancing, putting a wall up, right? So Ember has learned that from her grandparents, even though she's never met them. Okay. I think when we're talking about love, it is so incredibly valuable to look at our family system around what does love look like? What are the family narratives of love? Do people tend to stay together? Do they tend to divorce? If someone divorces, what happens to that person? How does the family deal with that person? Are they outcast? Whatever it is. Are people married but not in love? Is there a lot of fighting? Has there been abuse? Like, we want to kind of look at what are the models that keep getting passed down around love. And even if you are someone who has a lot of privilege, if you're a white person in society, cisgendered, all of those things, able-bodied, um, even within those highly privileged families, there's still trauma because human beings have been traumatizing each other as long as we've existed. I think we're trying to do it less, but man, we keep doing it. So, even in a place like New York City, Even the white people who have been there for a long period of time, they may have their own family traumas, cultural traumas, different reasons why their family immigrated, all those things that can still create some tension within the family system that's worth looking at because sometimes we have these issues where it's like, why am I this way? Like I have such a good relationship with my parents. I came from a good childhood, all of these things. Why do I struggle so much with love? Sometimes if you have that question, you want to look at your grandparents, your great grandparents, what was happening in the world. If you have immigrants anywhere in your family, where did they come from? Why did they come? What were the circumstances around them coming? Who participated in wars? What was going on with children being born or not born or whatever it is. So, looking at that stuff can be really illuminating to figure out what's going on in your family system. So in this case, I think Ember, there's a little bit of learned behavior from, being in a family that's had to deal with racism. We do see her dad, you know, being not so interested in water people coming around because he's been hurt by them before. And so, there is that kind of avoidant, like, I don't see water people as people. There's a moment where she says to her dad, he's not just water, dad, he's a water person. I think she says something like that to kind of remind him people are people. They're not just their element, right? So she's got a little bit of that she's learned from her dad, but I think there's also some inherited stuff. You can see that these stress coping mechanisms and so on do tend to get passed down, even and especially when there's cutoff. So there's also this piece around pressure, I think, that comes in, and this is a big theme for Ember, immigrant pressure, right? This idea that her parents came to Element City to give her a better life. And so she feels like she has to take over the fireplace. And that's, what she's required to do. And there's a moment where she and Wade are talking and she kind of realizes that some of her anger and aggression, her inability to kind of control herself at the fireplace is actually coming from a place of noticing I actually don't wanna do this. This isn't my life's purpose. She's a beautiful, glass blower, and she, wants to pursue that, but it doesn't feel like there's space for that in her particular immigrant, narrative. For some people in that same immigrant narrative of, like, we came from wherever, we're here for a new life, there are often a few generations that really struggle with racism to, establish themselves, to get enough money, whatever it is. And if you're, lucky enough to be, and from an immigrant family, and you're good, and you've got money, and you've got inheritance, and you've got, lovely parents, and all those things. Sometimes the pressure looks like, so what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? You are the golden child. You are what we've all come here for. You're what we've been fighting for this whole time. So what are you going to do with it? And if you don't do something good with it, you're wasting your privilege, right? That's so earned. When you have other people in the culture whose privilege is like so passed down, so long running, whatever it is, if that privilege has been fought for on your behalf, but you're not the one that fought for it, that can create a different kind of, pressure and anxiety around like, "Oh god, what is the purpose of my life? What should I be doing here? How can I give back?" And sometimes people struggle the way Wade does, which is a little bit different, but he kind of doesn't know what he wants to do, like, he doesn't really have a great sense of purpose. He kind of finds it in Ember to a degree, which certainly happens. It may not be the healthiest way to deal with your meaning of life issues to put it into your partner, but, people do that. Um, so, they've both got a little bit of their anxieties going on, but it's such higher pressure for Ember. And that's a big reason why she doesn't want to pursue things with Wade because it's going to let down her family. Her parents are going to hate it. A lot of people in the fire community would be shocked that she's with someone who's, from a water, like blah, blah, blah. Like there's so much going on for her around that that she decides that she has to say, "No, wait, I don't love you," even though, of course, it's not true. So there's also a couple of moments actually, where we witness Ember getting the ick from Wade. And it's moments where, he and his family are crying together in like a really loving way when he's being really like emotionally expressive towards her. You can see even in her little animated fire face, it's a bit of like, "Ugh, what's going on here? This is so intense." Again, the avoidant person will have discomfort with really genuine, healthy love and closeness coming at them, ultimately because there's vulnerability there. But the way that it tends to play out is this ick thing, okay? So the ick came up also in, I don't know how many of you saw, Nobody Wants This, that, short series with Kristen Bell and Adam Brody. There's a moment where, she's kinda struggling with dating, all of these things. They fall in love, there's a moment where he's, like, trying to impress her parents, and he's bringing over flowers and all this stuff, and she gets the ick. And it was interesting in this show because I think this is similar to how it happens with Ember and, like, me. Like, I've been through this, where it's actually when someone is, sometimes it's when someone shows their humanness, when someone makes a mistake or has some vulnerability. It's often when someone is, like, too loving, I had so many moments where, I might be dating someone who is, like, seems, like, too into me at the beginning. I'm just like, "What's wrong with you? Like, why would you be into me? Like, if you're into me, there must be something wrong with you." Some I had to work on in therapy. But it would freak me out, right? I would kind of be like, "Oh, that's too much." And there's such a cliche, I think, about, girls who like bad guys, like guys who feel even my husband was talking about this the other day, like, if you like a girl, you have to be just distant enough and you can't come on too strong and all of these things because it's so easy for them to get freaked out. Again, I think this can happen with any gender, but it's also I think some of this goes back to, okay, many women of my generation, at least, would have had fathers with some emotional distance because think about where their fathers came from. They were probably in the war. These men, patriarchy at the time was teaching men, to never show emotions, to be always stoic. That maybe you can express a little bit of anger, but that's the max of emotion that you can express. To this day, it is so much more common for women to go to therapy than men. Men don't have the emotional resources that are often given to women. Women don't always access them either, but it can be, I think patriarchy is actually so hard on men in a lot of ways. And so these women, did not grow up with, a male role model of someone who was, like, really open with their feelings and very empathetic and even attuned. I think there are a lot of distant dads that, if you think about their dads and whatever, where that came from many different cultures in many different ways, yeah, like, it's a thing. A lot of people would have grown up with that. And so, a lot of men who are courting women notice that these women get freaked out by it. So maybe the ick is actually your system noticing this is a bit different for me. This feels unfamiliar. Someone is offering to love me in a way that I've never been loved by a male person or masculine person. And again, this could go in lots of different gendered ways. But the ick is actually that signal of saying like, "Oh, protect yourself because this can't be real," right? Like I can't believe in this or I can't trust this. So let me retreat away from it. And in Nobody Wants This, you see Kristen Bell's character getting over it, which you often don't see. I feel like the ick is something that a lot of people talk about as like, oh, once you get the ick, you can never go back and all these things. I think especially once you're already having these attachment feelings for someone, if you notice the it coming up, it might be telling you like, yeah, this is your system trying to change. This is your body trying to experience what it's like to be loved in a healthy way. And that's really unfamiliar and your body doesn't know what to do with it. So you get this disgust feeling. But actually what that's signaling is, there's something different here. There's something unfamiliar here. And so for many of us, we have to kind of unlearn the patterns of love that we were used to, chasing after someone who's a bit distant, there's a line from Beyonce's Lemonade that was probably Worcestershire, which is something like, I fell in love with the back of your head, right? Like you're always leaving, I'm always pursuing you. Putting up with breadcrumbs, all of that stuff. Like if that's what it was like with our fathers, or our mothers or our attachment figures or whatever it was, then we might always feel like that's what love is supposed to be like. That's what our systems know of it. And so when we experience it, our bodies say, "Oh, we're in love," right? When actually thinking about it a bit more critically, like, hold on, what does that mean? So I think if you're relating to some of what I'm saying, right? It might be useful to think a little more critically about like, well, what do I want love to mean? What do I want that experience to be? And if I get the ick, let me really look at that. Because, of course, sometimes we can have an instinct that says, for some reason, this person is not okay for me. We think again of, Seinfeld dated so many amazing women, and he would find some little thing about them. He was like, "Oh, I can't be with this person. Her hands are too big," or whatever. Like, it would be some tiny little thing. That's avoidant attachment, right? That's making sure you never get vulnerable enough to be that close with somebody, that intimate with somebody, that they can know you, for who you really are, which is what a lot of us really fear. So anyway, all of this to say, Ember and Wade figure it out, right? Ember kind of gets over her avoidant thing. She's able to be vulnerable enough with Wade. It takes him dying and coming back to life. I think she saves his life like 3 times in this movie, actually, which is another thing that's kind of, we have that sort of fairy tale, like, damsel in distress, the knight in shining armor comes to rescue her. A lot of us have the rescue, you know, dynamic sort of imprinted in us in some way, culturally or familially. And here we have this incredibly sweet, emotional guy who, almost gets swept away in the water, and she rescues him from that. And then she rescues him when he kind of turns into steam, and she has to help him to cry to come back to life and all these things. She's his rescuer in a lot of ways. But she's able by the end to be vulnerable enough to say, like, I actually do want to be with you. And I want to try to make this work. And I'm willing to sit with the discomfort of, the interracial aspects of things, the intergenerational aspects of things. Of course, her wonderful parents come around, and it's all like a very sweet and very happy ending for that romance. But what I love about it is that it's not this archetypal damsel in distress, rescuer, distant guy who, like in Twilight, only likes you because you're special and he's going to prove to you that you're lovable after all, or whatever it is. It feels like a much more human romance. It feels like something that people could actually go through. And again, I mean, we'll see how it all goes with my 4-year-old when he's a dating man one day. But I love that this is an example of what he's getting around what love could look like and what secure attachment could look like and what it could feel like to date in a way where you trust that you're lovable and you try and you can feel sad about rejection, but you know, it's not going to turn you inside out. Like, you're not going to die from that rejection, and you know that you're lovable enough to move on. I think those are just great qualities for my son to be thinking about and following. So let's see. So those are some of my thoughts about elemental and attachment theory and love and the importance of it. Valentine's Day is this month, and it can be a weird one. It can bring up stuff for a lot of us, whether we're in relationships or not. But if you are somebody that struggles in relationships sometimes, or that wants a relationship and doesn't have one, just keep in mind, like, that's good. It's fine. It's healthy. It's normal. And a lot of our work on love is work within ourselves, right? And then we share that and we collaborate with the person that we're with, ideally. Okay. So thanks for listening. I'm going to start posting these popcorn therapies on YouTube so that if you prefer to watch, you can. Um, what else do I want you to know? On my website, juliepeters.ca, you can see counseling sessions with me, tarot sessions with me. I'm going to be taking a break over the summer, but you can get on the wait list. Just email me for when I come back in September. You can see an article that I wrote about elemental that goes over a lot of these main points. And, I would love for you to subscribe and follow and share this podcast if you enjoy it, so that more people can come across it. And I'll be back with more season 2. I don't know exactly when, but I'll be back, and I'm looking forward to hearing any thoughts that you might have about this movie, about attachment theory, any of the stuff that we brought up today. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.